Near Boca Chica village in South Texas, SpaceX's first orbital Starship SN20 was supposed to be set over its massive Super Heavy Booster 4 for the first time on August 6, 2021 at the company's Starbase facility. SpaceX's Starship program, which wants the world's tallest and most powerful rocket, will eventually put people and cargo on Mars. The latest prototype, SN20, is waiting for the chance to go into orbit. Several other prototypes have made flights, ground tests, and sometimes even testing mistakes in the effort to improve the future flights. But to operate the Starship Super Heavy launch vehicle, SpaceX must get experimental permission and a vehicle operator license from the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation. U.S. Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) has blocked SpaceX Starship orbital launcher for safety issues, and I will explain next. In this video, we are going to discuss the FAA's decision about blocking the SpaceX Starship orbital launch and what caused this decision. Without further ado, let's dive right into it. It all started when SpaceX was building the massive tower for its Starship launch, but the company didn't expect what would happen next. For some reason, the company was running into trouble. The FAA's policies to put standards for authorized transportation to overseas, license and regulate commercial launch and re-entry activities, and the operation of launch and re-entry sites with the United States. And in its draft environmental review of SpaceX's Starship operations in South Texas, which includes the environmental effects of the Starship launches, especially in the environmentally sensitive area around the launch site, near Chica on the Texas Gulf Coast. The FAA sent a letter on May 6 to SpaceX about 4 months ago, asserting that the launch tower does not have government approval. It's likely an environmental review from the FAA could result in the organization recommending that Musk disassemble the tower that is presently being built. According to CNBC reports, the letter said changes would have to be made at the launch site, including to the integration towers, to mitigate significant impacts. Adding the FAA learned of the tower's construction based on publicly available video footage. The report itself does not decide whether the FAA ought to permit Starship orbital dispatches, but instead assesses the environmental impacts of launch activities and whether and how they can be neglected. The report might lead to FAA to look for what is called a more intensive environmental impact statement. Whereas most of the investigations around launch debris, road closures, and other exercises come under no notable impacts. A faltering block came under biological resources and determined the proposed action would adversely affect species listed under and critical habitat designed under the Federal Endangered Species Act (ESA). An FAA spokesman said that the agency's environmental review proceeding of SpaceX's proposed rocket gathering integrating tower is ongoing, and continues saying that the company is building the tower at its own risk. The FAA also noted it was dependent on discussing with other agencies such as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service concerning endangered species or species of concern. The next step will be to get input from the public before the FAA can finalize its assessment, with licenses for Starship and Super Heavy orbital launches hopefully following. After all, it would be unfortunate if the impressive Starship and Super Heavy stack remained mere Texas ornamentation. This environmental valuation, though, may only apply to initial Starship launches from Boca Chica. The valuation assumes up to 20 Starship suborbital test flights annually during its development phase and up to 5 Starship Super Heavy orbital launches annually. SpaceX's project demand for Starship is likely to far exceed that flight rate, which could require a re-evaluation of its environmental effects. On the other hand, SpaceX did not respond to a request for comment, but Musk has constantly criticized the FAA and the U.S. regulatory system, and SpaceX told the FAA in May that it did not believe the review was necessary because it only intends to use the integration tower for production, research, and development purposes, and not for FAA license or permitted launches, the FAA said. But the agency said the description and documents indicate otherwise. The FAA cited a SpaceX documentation that the towers would be used to integrate the Starship Super Heavy launch vehicle. Super Heavy would be mated to the launch mount, followed by Starship mated to Super Heavy. The FAA letter said coding SpaceX's May 5 submission. On September 17, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk in his tweet called on the public to support his company's Boca Chica plans. Please add your voice to the public comments. Support is greatly appreciated. He said, "Humanity's future on the Moon, Mars, and beyond depends upon it." Once the public comment period closes, the FAA will incorporate those comments and other works into final versions of the environmental assessment. The FAA will then make a recorded decision about whether the proposal would have a significant environmental impacts. Only when that is done, it would complete the licensing process of Starship Super Heavy orbital launches. This isn't the first time SpaceX and the FAA have butted heads. In June, the government organization exposed that SpaceX had exceeded the numbers of hours it was allowed to close roads and beaches around Boca Chica, Texas for its launches. The FAA gave Musk's company permission to block off public areas for up to 300 hours in 2021. But SpaceX soared past that number in under 6 months. Back in January, the FAA discovered that SpaceX's first high-altitude Starship test also breaks the company's test license. The FAA didn't specify what the issue was, though it had to do with the ship's explosive landing. The SN8 Starship launched successfully but exploded after botched descent back to Earth. In April, the FAA signed off on SpaceX's next 3 Starship test launches, marking a major shift as the organization had previously approved 1 test at a time. The decision came shortly after the SpaceX-NASA deal, though it's unclear if there was a direct connection between those 2 decisions. The Federal Aviation Administration Administrator Steve Dickson spoke with Musk on the 12th of March for 30 minutes to strain the FAA's role in protecting public safety by ensuring regulatory compliance. He made it clear that the FAA expected SpaceX to develop and foster a robust safety culture that stresses adherence to FAA rules, the agency said in April. Starship's program tested several ground prototypes before attempting flight. The list of major prototypes in 2019 to 2020 included Mk1, destroyed during a tank pressure test, Mk2 abandoned for a newer design, Mk3 SN1 destroyed during a pressurization test, SN2 pressure tested successfully, SN3 destroyed during a test of its pressure tank, and SN4 destroyed during a static fire test following several successful tests. SpaceX had aimed to launch Starship on an uncrewed round-the-world test flight but is waiting for FAA's approval before proceeding. Musk has expressed frustration with FAA regulations in the past, saying the rules need to be streamlined if humanity ever hopes to launch rockets with enough frequency to start a settlement on Mars or achieve other ambitious space goals. This time around, Musk has said little about the process on Twitter beyond inviting the public to weigh in. "Humanity's future on the Moon, Mars, and beyond depends upon it," he said. Musk plans to fly even more Starship every year for Mars settlements. The FAA said in the 150-page draft assessment that a new environmental review would have to be performed if SpaceX ramped up the pace. That said, the FAA would examine the environmental effects of proposed future activities, in part by using information developed during the current process, the agency said. The orbital test is the next step in the plan to bring Starship to life. First revealed in 2017 under the name BFR, Starship is designed to be a fully recyclable ship able to send more than 100 tons or 100 people into space at one time. The ship will take on both the satellites and crew launching duties of the SpaceX rockets Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy and enable more ambitious missions to take place, like a crewed mission to Mars. In the middle of this decade, SpaceX plans to send the first human to Mars and establish the first city on it by 2050. SpaceX has cited the environmental review as one of the key milestones that must be passed to start orbital Starship flights, with CEO and founder Elon Musk saying in August that the company would be ready in a few weeks once the process is finished. Alright, thanks for watching. Now we want you to tell us what you think. Do you agree with the FAA's decision about blocking SpaceX Starship orbital launch? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. And don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.